Junior Laemmle made some of the smartest creative decisions in the history of Universal Studios. Then he made some decisions that cost my family the studio. So was Junior Laemmle a genius or was he reckless? Because look at his run of movies. All Quiet on the Western Front, Dracula, Frankenstein, The Old Dark House, The Invisible Man, The Mummy, The Bride of Frankenstein, Imitation of Life, Showboat. That is an insane run for one producer in less than a decade. But when you look behind the scenes, what was going on financially with Universal at that exact same time, the story gets a little more complicated. I'm Antonia Carlotta, and this is Universally Me, the channel for all things Universal and classic horror. My family started Universal Studios, and they made the Universal Monster movies, and Junior Laemmle, the man of the hour, is my cousin. To understand Junior, you have to understand what he inherited. His father, my uncle Carl Laemmle, started Universal Studios in 1912, and he'd gotten into the film business just 6 years earlier when he opened up his first theater. And he quickly moved into film distribution and then production. Uncle Carl even won a Supreme Court case against Thomas Edison, but that's a story for a different video. Uncle Carl had built Universal from basically nothing, and because of that, he was very protective of it. Universal had absolutely made ambitious films before Junior. The Hunchback of Notre Dame and The Phantom of the Opera are two obvious examples that come to mind. Those films were big budget, they were risky, and not your standard fare for the 1920s. But generally, Uncle Carl was about safety and survival. Make lots of movies, keep budgets manageable, spread out the risk. Low risk, maybe lower reward, but Universal stays alive. Junior had different ideas. Junior became head of production at Universal at just 21 years old. I like to call him Hollywood's first Nepo baby. But in fairness, Junior had spent basically his entire life preparing for this job. He grew up on the Universal backlot. He sat in meetings, learned the books, watched movies being made, and even made some movies of his own. Junior grew up inside his little Universal family business, and he wanted to make it bigger, more important. He wanted Universal to have prestige. Where Uncle Carl was budget conscious and risk averse, Junior immediately started pushing Universal toward more expensive filmmaking. And don't forget, Hollywood was going through one of the biggest technological transitions in history, the transition to sound. Suddenly, studios needed new equipment, new stages, new production methods, and new expertise. And theaters needed to be actually equipped to play these movies. Junior embraced the change aggressively. He made Universal's first talkie in only a weekend after telling Fox he just wanted to do some tests and borrowing their equipment. And then he backed lavish productions like Broadway in 1929 and King of Jazz in 1930. These weren't small feats. A 50-foot camera crane was designed specifically for Broadway, and King of Jazz was a huge Technicolor musical revue. Junior was really trying to show Universal could compete on spectacle. Then, with All Quiet on the Western Front, Universal adapted Eric Maria Remarquet's enormously successful anti-war novel into a huge, serious, technically ambitious production directed by Louis Milestone. Unlike the escapism of some of Universal's big swings, All Quiet was politically charged and brutal. And it was extraordinary. All Quiet on the Western Front won the Academy Award that year for Best Picture, and Milestone won Best Director. Imagine being Junior Laemmle at this point. You're in your early 20s. Everyone thinks you just have your job because of your dad. You're spending money everyone's worried about you spending, but then you make one of the most acclaimed films the studio has ever made. Would that make you more cautious? No, of course not. If anything, it just validated his entire philosophy. Spend on quality, bet on filmmakers, take risks, make Universal important. And then he turned from the horrors of war to just plain horror. This is obviously the part of Junior's legacy that I talk the most about because the Universal monsters are such a vital part of Universal's identity, and it's almost impossible to imagine the studio without them. But in 1931, there was no Universal monster brand yet. There wasn't a playbook, no reliable franchise he was working off of. Junior saw something cinematic in those Gothic stories. They were frightening, romantic, atmospheric, and weird. And they allowed him a new avenue to grapple with some of the very real anxieties he himself carried about life and death. First, Dracula became a sensation, and then Frankenstein later that year. And then he kept going with The Mummy, The Old Dark House, The Invisible Man, The Black Cat, and The Bride of Frankenstein. It's because of Junior and Universal that the term horror was coined as a film genre. And every other studio, even the ones that thought Junior was crazy at first, soon followed on the horror bandwagon. And Junior wasn't just succeeding in horror. Backstreet, Little Man What Now, The Good Fairy, Imitation of Life. He was working with some of the best filmmakers in Hollywood, and he helped create an identity for Universal. And he elevated them so they were sparring against the bigger studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, and Fox. Junior put Universal in that conversation. So creatively, genius. Branding, genius. Financially, that's where things get a little messy. The Great Depression was devastating the film industry. Studios had just invested so much money into converting the industry to sound, and audiences weren't seeing as many movies. On Junior's big budgets, his hits were great hits, but his misses were much bigger losses. But Junior didn't back down. He stood by his vision and he kept spending. And with hindsight, we can see that he was right. His films had an impact both culturally and financially. But time wasn't always on his side. Universal didn't need money in 90 years, it needed money now. As Universal was entering 1936, it was seriously short of cash. And Junior was still pursuing prestige productions like Magnificent Obsession, Sutter's Gold, and a new version of Showboat. And Showboat, in particular, would prove to be a problem. Directed by James Whale, the same man who made Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, and The Bride of Frankenstein, and starring Irene Dunne, Paul Robeson, and Helen Morgan, Junior believed Showboat could be one of Universal's greatest movies, and he wanted to do whatever it took to bring it to life. Uncle Carl, Junior's dad, had never taken out a loan for Universal before. He'd never needed to. But for Showboat, Junior convinced him to take out a loan to help finish the movie. And attached to that loan was one very dangerous condition. If they didn't pay back the loan on time, Standard Capital had the option to buy Universal. Junior was sure they were going to finish on time. He was sure Showboat was going to be a hit. And he was sure that Standard Capital actually had no interest in buying Universal. But that is where Junior was reckless, because Showboat did continue going over time and over budget, and Standard Capital did, in fact, want to buy Universal. So that is how my family lost the studio. Showboat came out a few months later, and it was a huge hit. Junior wasn't wrong about that. He had the vision, but it didn't matter. Losing the studio over that gamble was a consequence that I'm sure weighed heavily on him for the rest of his life. I do want to defend Junior, though. I think reckless might be too strong a word. I mean, look at what he made. How many producers in their 20s ever had a run like his? How many studio execs can say they helped create characters so commercially and culturally significant a century later? Junior had extraordinary instincts about movies. He knew how to put a team together. He knew what audiences wanted to see. And he may have been the first ever to see that horror could be prestigious. When he became head of production at Universal, he saw the ways the studio could evolve, and for a time, he was successful in seeing those through. His vision was genius, but his execution became reckless. He wasn't wrong about what Universal could or should become. He was just wrong about how much he should gamble in order to get there. In the comments, I want to know, if you were running a film studio, would you be more like Uncle Carl, financially safe and frugal? Or would you be more like Junior, spending big and taking risks? Don't forget, paid members are getting bonus videos, pictures, and more. It's the best way to support Universally Me. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.